All right, so
Okay.
we are now recording, so official welcome to all. Thank you so much for making some time to be here. You have been with us with our national training webinar series, and so now this is our session that we had put in actually our grant, BIA grant application. We had asked to be able to do some technical assistance with our trainees as well as doing the big national series. And so this is our opportunity to come together as a region. It's not our only opportunity to communicate as a region because we set up the groups.io listserv so that if there's continual interest in communicating over email, we can. So I encourage you guys to use that for questions, announcements, anything you want to do to talk to each other or Shasta or I. And that's something that we'll just continue on after this session as well. And so, first of all, I hope you're safe and well. I know many of you, like Shasta, are probably spending some time working on the pandemic. And if you're like Shasta and I may be seeing some parallels with your work in climate change. But I just want to send you well wishes. I'm sure it's difficult for all of your communities. You maybe have noticed we've moved from GoToWebinar to GoToMeeting. GoToMeeting is just a little different because it allows us to look at each other, all of us, not just presenters this way. So thank you for getting on video. It's really nice to see you. I like having a small group like this. We have some of the similar features. If you look on the right on your board, your GoToMeeting board, feel free if you want to mute yourself while you're not talking to do so. And you can use the chat box as well. But I think with such a small group, if you have something to say, you just go ahead and say it out loud. This is intended to be interactive. There's designated points for discussion, but even throughout, if you have a question and you want to stop things, feel free. So chat or just unmute yourself. Thinking we might have either lost someone or gained someone. So, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. Like I said earlier, we have ourselves together until 11 today. We don't have to use the whole time if we don't need it. So we'll just kind of see how it goes. Shasta, before we dive in, do you want to say any opening remarks as our lead tribe?
I mean, if you give me the microphone, I will talk for 2 straight hours. So I want to echo that it's really great to actually see your faces, and what I'm eager to hear is how many of you already know one another and maybe doing work together, and just hear the ways that you think you're going to be able to use this group to be able to support one another. I think that's really important. And in Southern California, I have really great relationships with so many of our local tribes down here, and I don't know what I would do without that support. So if you're not doing that already, I hope this is an opportunity to create those connections. And if you already have those connections, then even better, and hopefully we can all learn something from one another.
Now, I don't work in the Pacific Northwest. I've been there for work, but I do know that you all are actually doing a lot together. There's a lot of organization in the Pacific Northwest, so I think you might be able to tell more to each other than we're able to tell to you. So we're really looking for this to be peer-to-peer knowledge sharing as well. There's actually 13 members of your cohort that joined the training and signed up to be part of a cohort. And I think they represent six or so tribes. Some others are coming in from federal agencies and things. We'll see if we get some of those folks as well. So on your screen here, we're showing a little map of, this is just showing some of the tribes in the Pacific Northwest area. When we designated our regions, we made them sort of broad. So there's different definitions of Northwest. In this case, we were basically talking about folks in the Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. So that might not be exactly the way that Northwest is always defined, but that's kind of how it shook out for us and our participants. So we want to start off today with some introductions. That'll be next. And the introductions also involve a little bit of an overview of just what we know about climate exposures and impacts in the Northwest. And then I want to run through some regional resources that I'm aware of that really are some good places to go for information that it might be a little bit more specific than we're able to get into on our national webinar series. We try to keep it applicable to folks across the country. And then we'll have a good amount of time for some discussion so that you all have a chance to share your regional knowledge, experiences, ideas, needs. So I have a bunch of questions to pose to you, and then we can just let the dialogue flow where it wants to. And then I want to share with you some of our tools that we've built as part of the Tribal Climate Health Project that we'll just go into a little bit more detail on in here than we will in the webinar series, just to help you use them and ask questions about them as we go through. And at the end, if we haven't addressed any of your questions yet, then we'll have some more time for some Q&A. Does that sound good? Did anybody have other expectations or things that you want to cover today together? Okay. So let's go ahead with some introductions. So just a little bit of information about the purpose of these. We really were designing these technical assistance remote workshops to be focused exclusively on the unique health exposures, impacts, and strategies associated with our selected regions. And so you guys are one of 5 regions that we picked. This is intended to supplement the national training by leveraging and sharing region-specific knowledge, data, partnerships, and other opportunities and resources. And the idea here also is to support regional multidisciplinary relationship building and collaboration. So I'll be interested to hear from you if you actually all knew each other already, or if this is brand new, and hopefully you walk away with a few new connections in your network that can help you with your climate work. Okay, so I'm gonna now leave it up to you all to introduce yourself. When you do, don't forget to unmute yourself. And just for now, give us your name, organization, your location, and your role in climate change for your organization. And I'll go ahead, actually, Shasta, you're really good at this. Why don't you list people out when you want them to introduce themselves?
All right, well, I'm just going to go from left to right on the screen. So let's start with Hope.
All right, good morning. My name's Hope Reedon. I work for the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation in Oakville, Washington, which is about halfway between Olympia and the coast in Washington State. I am their fish and wildlife biologist, and Chehalis Tribe has a pretty unique role. We are a non-treaty tribe, so we don't have any agreements with either state or federal government, which sometimes is great, sometimes is kind of a pain. But it's really different from most of the other tribes in Washington that have to, that deal with, fishing and hunting rights. As far as my role in climate change, I realized that there's all these great opportunities like this webinar series and the BIA resiliency grants, and we just didn't have any long-term planning for that. So just, in my free time, I've been piecing together, I picked up a social scientist to help augment, the person side of things. And she and I have just been trying to, learn as much as we can, and everything I've learned is that all my assumptions were wrong. Unfortunately it's furloughed and I'm still trucking along. But anything to keep this moving. So it's good to meet everyone. So cheers.
Thank you, Hope, and yay for social scientists, because I'm an anthropologist, so I'm all about the social science component of the work that we do. I think it's super important. So that's great to hear. All right, how about Michaela?
Hi everyone. How to turn my mic on. My name is Michaela Marr. I'm with the Mechoopda Indian tribe of Chico Rancheria. We're located in Chico, California. Currently, our plans for climate change mitigation don't really go beyond just fulfilling EPA grants. So that's one of the reasons why I joined this cohort and webinar training series, was to learn more about what we can do and how we can plan. So that's about it.
Great, glad that you are here, and it just shows you the breadth of the geographic area too. You know, you're probably the furthest south in our Pacific Northwest cohort down in Chico, but that's still, you know, it's part of that region. So we're glad you're here.
Great.
All right, Aaron, let's hear those birds.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Aaron Jones. I work for the Tulalip tribes. We're 35 miles north of Seattle. So I'm the Treaty Rights Protection Specialist in our Treaty Rights Office in Natural Resources. And so my role in climate change is basically assisting our climate change coordinator, who unfortunately got furloughed during this time. And so I'm kind of like in this observe and report role, but I'm still trying to help keep some of our projects moving along during this time. But I'm excited about this workshop and this whole webinar series because I've learned a lot about climate and health. And so it's just been, I don't know, I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for having this.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much. And Chaz, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. And unfortunately, I can't say that I know anyone that's on the call from the Northwest. However, I work for the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, and I am their tribal liaison in their climate change program. And my sole purpose in existing is to assist Northwestern tribes in dealing with any of their climate change priority issues. So I help a lot of tribes in the Northwest acquire funding. I do grant coaching. We help them do vulnerability assessments. I help them connect them to resources. Knowledge experts, if they need a knowledge expert in a certain field. Whatever it is that you need, I'm available to assist or find the resources to assist. Basically, that's it. So yeah, I'm happy to meet everyone. I am always trying to expand my network of people in the Northwest. I've been working in this position for 3 years, and my network grows organically all the time. However, people come and people go. I've worked with Phil North at Tulalip a little bit, but have never met Aaron. So there's just all these people, all these players in this field working for all the tribes, and it's not easy just to identify all the relevant players. So I am thankful to continue to join groups like this to continue reaching out to tribes across the region. And my region includes Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, some tribes in Northern California, and a couple tribes in Western Montana.
So would Michaela be able to come to you? Is she included in your region, or was there maybe somebody else we might refer her to?
Technically, she's not included in my region. However, if she reached out to me, I would certainly offer to assist, but I would first defer to my colleague in the Southwest, which is what we refer to her region as. Althea Walker is our tribal liaison in the Southwestern U.S.
Got it.
Yeah,
well, thank you so much.
Chaz is somebody whose name you should know. You know, I see your name, and I know we've been on other, I think, calls together, and probably seen you at Rising Voices and at NAF and all those places. But I just assumed you and Aaron were brothers. You got the same last name, so I mean, Jones. It's not like it's a popular name. So I'm kidding.
We're actually cousins.
You just never met. That's all.
Well, right. We're super lucky to have you on this. You could probably run this whole session yourself, but we're probably going to defer to you plenty throughout.
I look forward to hearing all that you guys are doing too.
Great. Hey, Shasta, I think you and I probably have introduced ourselves ad nauseum, but do you want to just remind people where we are, who we are?
Yes, where we are at least. Environmental Director, Palo Band of Mission Indians, San Diego County, California. That's it.
And Angie Hacker with a firm called Prosper Sustainably, working with tribes all over the country. And I'm currently in Dana Point, California. Okay. So
is there someone on the phone or not on video?
Oh, I'm sorry. We have another person who's not on video. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Who was that?
Kelly Williams. There was a Kelly Williams on the call, but I don't see her now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think right now it's showing that we have 6 attendees and there's 6 of us across the screen, so I think we might have lost her.
Okay.
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 Oops, we just lost Erin.
So we have we've gone over the climate exposures and impacts pretty deeply in the webinar series, but like I said, most of the things we're doing are countrywide, and so just to spend a little time getting, wetting our whistles about what's specific to the Northwest. I'm pulling from some of the key reports that we're going to actually talk about in terms of resources. But what we hear mostly about the Northwest is things like changes in the timing of stream flow, reduced water supplies for competing demands, sea level rise, erosion, inundation risks to infrastructure, and increasing ocean acidity that pose major threats. And of course, increasing wildfire, insect outbreaks, and tree diseases are causing widespread tree die-off. So those are some of the highlights that actually come from the Northwest chapter of the National Climate Assessment. On the right is just a reminder of how we talk about it in our training, the Tribal Climate Health Project's framework for drivers, exposures, and impacts. And really, I would say for the Northwest, it's all of these exposures apply to you. In Southern California, we don't, because the tribes are often inland, we don't talk as much about sea level rise, but I think all of these are applicable. Temperature extremes, certainly wildfire, storms and flooding, perhaps, and maybe Chaz can chime in on this. I think the precipitation regime may be a little bit different than we're seeing in Southern California and other parts of the country, where you guys are already a high precipitation area, so maybe more accustomed to the stream flow changes and things like that. Drought is certainly an issue, and then melting ice and sea level rise. A lot of tribes in the Pacific Northwest are actually coastal, and so are going to be inundated by saltwater intrusion and other sea level rise impacts. And so just hearing these very high level exposures and impacts, just wanting to hear from you all about the health impacts that your community is already facing as a result of some of these climate condition changes. If anybody wants to chime in.
I'll just add that we have major issues with flooding in terms of the change in seasonality of the warming season. So our snowpack is melting much earlier, or even getting rain on snow events, so that we get big flooding events in the wintertime.
Yes.
That's a major problem out here. And I don't know if either of the tribes that we have here are experiencing those things, because Tulalip is not really near the mountains, or Chehalis. Or Chehalis may be experiencing that, no? No.
I know for...
Sorry.
Go ahead, Erin.
Okay, sorry, Erin. I didn't see if there was a hand raise option, but I will always talk over people. I come from a long line of interrupters because we get so excited. But yeah, we're like halfway through a river basin kind of in the flood, and that's a growing concern because due to sea level rise, we're seeing greater floods, but we're far enough inland that people don't always think that we still have the oceanic influence and longer term inundations, and trying to like convince it seems like mostly NOAA is the one that's really like, no, you guys are too far inland to be affected by the ocean. We are seeing these changes. The Chehalis River is not glacial fed, so it's spring fed and some snow melts, but we are seeing huge changes. Like right now, it's the end of April. We should be like at like peak heights and river levels, and it looks like it's August or September.
Wow. And Erin, were you trying to chime in also?
Yeah, the in terms of the flooding, we do have a lot of localized flooding due to the increased storms that we've been getting. Like back in September when we had that storm with 1,000 lightning bolts, it was crazy. But it rolled over Tulalip, and our language department got flooded out from a localized flooding event. It's not like major, but we are also projecting that we're going to get storm surges and storm surge flooding related to sea level rise toward the end of the century. Sorry. And so we're trying to find ways to kind of plan around that. That'll be more on our business side of the reservation in Quilceda. So we do have a little bit of that concern later in the century for sure.
Are any of you working with health folks on any of these climate impacts, or just in general in your climate work?
I am a little bit, but because our work is really just very much in its infancy, it hasn't been picked up, but I went to the Northwest Climate Conference last fall in Portland and, sat in on, like the effects of mental health. And, because I'm usually thinking of things from a natural resource perspective, that was really like mind blowing for me of just, just little changes and how much they're going to affect all of us just emotionally and mentally, as well as, like these novel diseases that are going to start becoming more and more commonplace. And, just trying to rally people without being like too naggy of like, you got to do something, really trying to avoid like crying wolf, but rally support for, like this affects us all in ways that we don't even know yet.
Yeah, in Chico, flooding is a problem, but I think the majority of people are still really terrified about another wildfire. Last year we experienced the Camp Fire, and we're still dealing with the aftermath and recovering. So I think wildfire is one of the biggest things that we want to plan for.
And Michaela, do you have access to any health professionals in your work?
Yes, Northern Valley Indian Health.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's dive in. There's one more diagram here I was able to pull from the Northwest chapter of the National Climate Assessment that talks a little bit about some of the health impacts, and then I want to dive in on just a little bit more. So this is a nice diagram. It's showing the 4 key messages that came from the Northwest chapter of the National Climate Assessment. So it's talking about our natural resources economy sustains livelihood in communities. That's one message. Our heritage and quality of life are tied to the health of the natural environment. Key message 3, our water, transportation, and energy infrastructure provide services to urban and rural communities. And 4, our health and social systems protect and support the health and well-being of our communities. And so this is interesting. Oh, and 5, obviously frontline communities experience the first and often worst effects of climate change. And of course, we know tribes are often included in frontline communities. This is an interesting diagram because they're tying these messages to what happened in 2015, which is apparently was a very difficult and challenging year for climate effects. I don't know if you all felt that, remember that, if that's a key year for you in your mind. But some of the health impacts they talk about are spikes in heat illnesses, record cases of infectious disease, increases in emergency food assistance. And beyond that, I would assume you all are seeing a lot of air contamination, especially around wildfires, and smoke-related contamination, drinking water supply problems, and what we hear a lot is marine water contamination and food contamination. And in fact, Paula is one of the climate-ready tribes, and another climate-ready tribe that we get to work alongside of is the Lumi Nation, and they have a whole focus on shellfish biotoxins and harmful algal blooms. And I'm just wondering if anybody here can relate to any of to any of those health impacts that I just kind of went over, if those are true for you yet or things that you might be preparing for.
Yeah, and I was going to add that the Swinomish Nation, you all may know this, but the Swinomish Nation actually incorporating native health indicators into their climate adaptation planning efforts, which is pretty cool. But I think a lot of the tribes are incorporating cultural health into their plans, and cultural and mental health, which I think is super important to think about, at least.
Yep.
There are still plenty of tribes that focus entirely on natural resources, but I think as the science and the integration of traditional knowledge into climate science starts to mature, I'm seeing a lot more people focusing on cultural health.
Well, and I think that's important to keep in mind, that in pretty much every case, the health of the natural resources is not separate from the health of the culture. And so, things like the algal blooms that make it difficult to consume the shellfish, and the shellfish might be a really significant part of the traditional subsistence, or Hope, you mentioned the river, how it's at these August levels and it should be so much higher. I don't know if there's any subsistence fishing that's being affected by that, and that may be true, for any tribe that's living in a riverine system or a coastal and river system. So if those things are being affected, then your cultural life is also being affected. So that ties back into the mental health, that if you cannot access those resources, then it has a pretty devastating impact on people's mental health as well.
Yeah, the way that we have organized or categorized impacts for the Tribal Climate Health Project is we generally look at natural environment, built environment, and health and social environment. And health and social environment we broke down into human health, which is both physical, physiological, and mental health, cultural health, and socioeconomic health. So we definitely dive more into all of those in the larger part of the training. And actually, a little shout out, since we've been talking a little bit about mental health. Tomorrow is our next webinar, and we're super excited to have a guest speaker who's an expert on psychosocial resilience. So we'll be talking more about the psychological impacts tomorrow on our webinar. Okay, Chaz, anybody else want to add more to just some of the key exposures or impacts, particularly that affect health?
It could be heat, physical injury based on, flooding, impacting individuals, drowning, whatnot. Mental, cultural, yeah. So many things.
So many things. So as we go on, I'm going to share some resources with you, and I think that will help point you in the right direction for information on how to learn more about what your particular exposures and impacts are. And some of the tools that we've created as the Tribal Climate Health Project, we'll talk about later, give you an inventory of potential health impacts and other impacts to look for, and indicators for how to sort of describe how to measure those things and where to find data for them. So I think we'll get into a little bit more detail.
And I want to just take a moment to point out here that this is where these connections from different areas, even though you're all in the Pacific Northwest as a large, writ large, Michaela mentioned the campfire and the impacts of the campfire. And generally, when we think of wildfire, you think of California. You don't think of Washington State and Oregon, but those areas are just as impacted nowadays by wildfire. So there may be things you can learn from tribes like Michaela's and their response, and be able to apply them to your own situations. I know even if there's a wildfire in Idaho, that smoke can drift over into Washington and Oregon. And so those are all impacts that you might not normally be thinking about, but there's other tribes that are experiencing those things in your area, and that's a good way to make a connection to see how they're dealing with it, and that can help you as well.
But actually, you know, the area near Chehalis, they get extreme, I don't know about specifically about Chehalis, but there are extreme fires that occur out on the Olympic Peninsula intermittently. When they happen, they don't happen often because it's a wet forest, but when it does happen, there's a huge amount of fuel load, and it's extreme and devastating. And yeah, I think most of the tribes up here are actually impacted by wildfire in some way or another.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to be, you know, territorial about California. That's our disaster. You can't have it.
Agreed.
I think some of the interesting maps and data are showing that the relative change in wildfire intensity or duration in the Northwest is actually, the Northwest is the highest for relative change. So Southern California and other places might have been bad for a longer period of time, perhaps, but the relative change is happening in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. So let's get into some regional resources, and these are just the ones that I am aware of that I wanted to make sure you are aware of. This could be very elemental to you. You might be like, yeah, we know about those. As if you can, please add to this list as we go through and tell each other what resources you have found to be most helpful. So I'll just start off really basic with these reports that I've been sort of talking about. The 4th National Climate Assessment, this was produced, I think the latest one in 2018, and there are many reports associated with the National Climate Assessment. In addition, there are chapters for each region, and so there is a Northwest chapter, and it reads, it's a quick read, I think. It's organized nicely. It's not very long, and it really just gives you a good basic overview of what's happening in the Northwest as a result of climate change. And so you have a link there. There's also the 4th National Climate Assessment provides Northwest highlights, really short snapshot of what's going on in the Northwest. So these kinds of things are helpful as you write up your own climate change publications. If you're doing a vulnerability assessment or a presentation to your council or put any other talking points, these are some easy places to go and look for information, quotes and things like that, and some data. And you can easily pull and download some good diagrams. There's also the Tribes and Indigenous Peoples chapter of the National Climate Assessment that I'd recommend, even though it's not as specific to the Northwest. And just another report that, again, not totally specific to the Northwest, but the USDA has a Climate Change and Indigenous Peoples report, and it provides a synthesis of current impacts and experiences and it does have examples that pull from the Northwest. So those are just a few reports to go to. I think you all probably know this. Oh, did I hear a comment? No. I think you probably all know about the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Network. I'm actually on it just because occasionally we have things we want to share with that group because we're working nationally. It's part of the Tribal Climate Change Project out of the University of Oregon. Y'all are very, I think, fortunate to have access to a couple of universities doing some major work with tribes across the country. I mean, not across the country, across your region. And so, for example, then you've got a URL there. They do a few things. They have network calls that foster communication amongst a bunch of the agencies that work with tribes in the Pacific Northwest. Actually, raise your hand if you are already on that listserv. Okay. And Michaela, maybe you didn't, but I'm pretty sure Northern California would be able to join those and probably benefit from doing so. They do a great job of keeping track of funding opportunities as well, so it's good to just be on their list. The University of Oregon also produced something a couple years ago called a Tribal Climate Change Guide, and we've referenced that a bit, and we'll do so more in these upcoming webinar series that we're doing. And so that was done out of the University of Oregon, and it's a good guide for folks that are trying to get through their vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. And then Chaz, here you are. You've already explained to us a little bit about what you do. But technically, so you are affiliated with the University of Washington as well as the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, right?
It's really complicated, but my paycheck comes from AT&I. However, I actually sit at the USGS Climate Adaptation Science Center here in the Northwest. I'm really intended to serve as a liaison between the federal government and the tribes and make sure that everything the feds are doing works to benefit the tribes, not just as an afterthought. So I'm affiliated through the Climate Adaptation Science Center. We have a partnership with the University of Washington as well. So the CASC is also a partnership between UW and USGS. So I work very closely with UW, USGS, and AT&I, all of the above. And my email address you can see is a USGS email address.
Yeah, it is a complicated mix of organizations. But it's good that you exist. Is there anybody like you also providing any additional technical assistance to tribes in the area?
In the Northwest specifically, every agency has their own tribal liaisons. However, I think that you already mentioned Kathy Lynn. We have Meade Crosby at University of Washington, who's incredibly beneficial to work with tribes as well. And in the chat box, I did put a link to the tribal climate tool developed by Meade Crosby and the University of Washington. And that is a tool that in the Northwest, it may cover Chico, I don't know exactly, but they provide data associated with climate impacts to tribes that are specific for tribes in the Northwest. So Chehalis and Tulalip are definitely included on that tool.
Yes, that's actually a good segue to
go.
the next slide. Yeah, that's like one of the best resources that I've come across, and certainly been in conferences where it's been presented, and I've talked to Meade Crosby, and they're doing some really good work. So out of the University of Washington, again, out of their climate impacts group is the Tribal Climate Tool and a Tribal Support Desk. And so there's a couple URLs for you to go and access those resources. And so what I really like about this tool, some of the most overwhelming part of the work of doing climate vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans is to just get good, meaningful information so you can make good decisions. And so they've done a good job of compiling some key indicators and data, and they do it by tribal boundaries. So they've already drawn the boundary for each of the tribes that are eligible for using this tool, which is all the Pacific Northwest and Great Basin, what they say. And so all you have to do is drop down and find your tribe, and then go in, and they've already aggregated and analyzed some of the data for you, made some of it visualized, which is really cool. So you're able to kind of download pretty easily and use it for your vulnerability assessments. And to the extent that that's, anything is confusing or you need additional help, they have a support desk where they provide technical assistance as well. So very cool. I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. Has anybody actually gone on and used that yet? No. Okay, cool.
Another thing that's cool about that is that they actually did reach out to each of the tribes, and so they don't just use tribal reservation boundaries. It was up to the tribe to provide up to 3 boundaries that they consider to be relevant to them. So they may have their UNA areas, they may have a certain watershed that the tribe identified, or just a reservation boundary. It was really up to the tribe.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's helpful.
I do want to. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I just want to say that the climate impacts group is really good group to work with as a tribe. We still use them for some reports that we're having them work on around wildfire assessment in our treaty rights area. So they're really approachable. So it's a good plug-in to have them around. So
maybe you could tell, what level of assistance are you able to get? Are they compiling data for you or answering questions? What are they able to do?
So right now we have them working on a vegetation study, which is mostly they're compiling a lot of literature around how plants in our region might migrate in certain terrains or certain biomes. Additionally, we have them writing some technical reports, like we're doing an on-reservation wildfire risk assessment, and also doing kind of a literature report on our treaty rights area through them. And as long as you, I guess, have the grant funding or any kind of funding, you know, they'll do a really good report and do a really good job. And we have consistent meetings with them throughout the duration of the project, and they're, I don't know, really adaptable to, I guess, our work style. So it's been a really good partnership to have.
Yeah, that's great. It's really great to hear. Another resource here is the Northwest Climate Hub. So I think this might just be a collection of various other resources, but it sounds like they go through topics and impacts, and then there might actually be some data sources here as well. Chaz, is this a resource that you use very often?
You know, there's so many different resources available that I actually go straight to the deputy director of the hub when I need resources rather than to the website. Yep. But we have the Climate Adaptation Science Center has a scenario planning tool that I was just going to try to pull up real quick to share that I will also use.
Yeah, let me know if you want me to switch you to presenter, if you want to show us around a resource.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
And Kayla, I think you were going to say something. I thought I saw that look on your face. Oh, you're muted.
There we are. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I guess I kind of like had a question and also wanted to bring awareness to something that I thought might be a kind of a issue when doing a vulnerability assessment. So the tribal members of the Mechoopda tribe don't live on a specific like a reservation territory. We do have a tribal property, but it's right now it's just like a creek that runs through the middle of the property, and we are working on like some restoration for it so that it can be used more for cultural activities. But basically like the tribal members like live in housing apartments that the tribe owns, but they're like scattered throughout the city of Chico. So that kind of presents an issue with conducting a vulnerability assessment, which we haven't done yet.
Yeah, so you're having trouble figuring out what your boundary is?
Yes, I guess.
Yeah. But would you want to keep it within the city of Chico? You're just talking about tribal members that live within the city of Chico?
Yeah.
So you'd kind of
I guess like that live on like a Mechoopda owned housing.
Okay. So in specific pockets of Chico?
Yeah, and they're very small, so I don't know if a vulnerability assessment would be possible. Like I said, we haven't conducted one before.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, some of the challenges are the same that tribes that have a reservation base, which is just a small boundary is unlikely to always be tied to really good, very location-specific data. And so sometimes you have to go larger anyway. You know, sometimes at the city or county level or census tract level. But generally, you know, within a census tract or even, of course, a city, you're not going to see some of the indicators change too dramatically that are, you know, more climate condition related. So, you know, it's possible that your drought scenarios, your precipitation scenarios, your heat scenarios won't change as wildly. Things like sea level rise models may change and affect things differently. But yeah, if you know what pockets you're looking at, you're probably going to have to broaden a bit more. But then what you can do to be more specific to the people that you're wanting to target is to focus your engagement with them and talking more specifically with them about their concerns, their priorities, the things that they want to protect that are being threatened. And so you're focusing in on the values and priorities of the tribal members, but you're taking data that might be a little bit more broad in terms of geographic scale. I don't know, Chaz, can you chime in on that as well?
Sure. Yeah, I would suggest that, it doesn't really, the fact that you don't have a well-defined boundary, geographic boundary, I don't think is super important. I think that what's important is that the tribe and the community or come together and think about what actually makes you vulnerable as a population. No matter what your geography is, maybe the dispersion of your people is one of the vulnerabilities, or maybe it's one of the strengths that makes you more resilient. Rather than having a specific everybody located in a single location or to a single threat, maybe that makes you more resilient. And I think it really depends on your perspective, and certain tribes have varying perspectives on their different strengths and vulnerabilities. So I think it's really, that may just be a fact of life for your tribe and tribal community. And I think that it's up to you to decide what is important to you as a tribe. What would make you more resilient to climate impacts? Would it be developing a land base? I think these are all opportunities to help you explore your vulnerability and your resilience.
And you said that you have a health agency that you work with, an Indian Health Council, I believe, or something like that. And so,
yeah, Northern Indian Valley Health.
So they are probably tracking health information and impacts and outcomes for your tribal members, and hopefully they're coding it, that way, so that folks that are living off reservation lands are being captured. So they would be a good one to work with. Lots of information can come from health agencies. A lot of the places we look to for information, like the CDC's National Environmental Public Health Tracking System, would only go down to things as small as maybe a census tract, usually more like a county. Still useful, but oftentimes not quite as meaningful as knowing exactly what's going on with the people within your tribe. But actually, that's a good segue again. You guys are good. To another resource. So the Tribal Epidemiology Centers. You may remember one of our first webinars, we had the representative from California's Tribal Epidemiology Center. And so, Michaela, that would be a really good resource for you as well, to the extent that they've coded your tribal members well enough in health impacts to get some information from them. So health impacts, they might know something about emergency room visits for heat-related illness or gastrointestinal disease as a result of water contamination, or asthma rates or things like that. They can give you some information, data, and trends, and help you analyze that. And then the Northwest has its own, and that would be for the states of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And so they are a good place to go for data needs. And there are actual humans there that are expecting to be able to handle your requests and even provide some technical assistance and analysis for you to help you interpret those results. So those are the URLs to get there. If you need help connecting, I guess let us know. There's 12 of these centers across the country. And one of the things that Shasta and I are doing is a separate project working with the California Tribal Epidemiology Center to try to develop a data set and a request process specifically for climate change indicators. And so once that's released, we're able to share it more broadly with other tribal epidemiology centers. So we're really just trying to make it easier for tribes around the country to be able to request relevant health data for their climate change vulnerability assessments.
And I just want to add too that one of my favorite cliches nowadays is that climate change doesn't stop at tribal boundaries or reservation boundaries. So even if you have just a small reservation, like the Jamul Indian Village in San Diego County is 3 acres. That's it. Their whole reservation is 3 acres. But their tribal traditional landscape is, hundreds of square miles throughout Southern California and northern Mexico. So that's another place to be thinking about how to scale your vulnerability assessment, is what is our traditional use area? What's Mechoopda's traditional territory? And what are the impacts to that territory, and how is that going to affect those tribal members?
Great. And just a few more resources by state. So Washington, fortunately, each of you live in states that actually have an active public health department in this area. So the Washington State Department of Health has its own climate and health page, which has information on it that you might be able to pull from as if you are working, say, on a vulnerability assessment or adaptation plan and you want to make sure you're incorporating health into that. You can pull some information from the state. They also have the Washington Tracking Network, which is what you see on your screen, and it's a data portal. So you can get data on climate and health, both in under environment and carbon sources. And so yeah, the nice thing is that you can learn about certain indicators like air stagnation, drought, flood risk, natural hazards, snowpack, urban heat, weather extremes, and wildfire. And then you also can get, we'll talk more about this in our next vulnerability or our next webinar, which is tomorrow, how important it is to know some other data, including community characteristics and population characteristics, because those things can indicate your adaptive capacity and how sensitive your population is to the impacts of climate change. And so this is
okay,
just.
Wait. We have to say hi to the dog. I'm sorry, I can't stand it. Who's? Please introduce our new panel participant, Jazz.
This is George.
Hi, George. Oh, okay.
He's waking up from a nap.
My day just got 1,000 times better. Sorry, I just got way too excited.
Justin wants to do a full webinar series just for dogs. Yeah,
well, and cats too, but dogs are just so much better at participating in webinars. Aaron got so excited that we lost him. There he is. Okay, all right. Sorry, Angie, go ahead.
No problem. But that's it. I love to find a good data source. So maybe this is one the folks of you that are in Washington already know about, but it's worth looking at. And nobody here is from Oregon, but the Oregon Health Authority has a lot going for it as well, including their own climate and health profile report. They're really a leader in coming up with data reports. They have a resilience plan. They also have something called the Social Resilience Project, which is again in that vein of mental health and psychosocial resilience. So I talk about them quite a bit when I talk about psychosocial resilience because they're really doing some good work and trying to develop interventions to help communities feel more connected, recover better after disaster as a community.
And these are great resources that I actually do live in Oregon. I live in Corvallis. That's where I'm based out of. But I admittedly, this type of topic and resources are my weak point. My PhD is in hydrology and natural resources and climate. And so I appreciate having these resources. And I assume that you're going to share these with a slide deck.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You guys will have access to the slides and the recording as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Now there's probably more where this came from, but again, I'm not there, so I'm not as tied in. But I wanted to share what I knew. And then for Michaela and anybody else that might hear this recording that is from Northern California, California has a ton. I'm super familiar with it, so I'm just going to run through a few of those resources. A lot of good data sources. One is called CalAdapt. That's probably the big one for climate adaptation. So there's maps and chart visualization tools that provide anything from temperature to precipitation and just a huge range of data. It's very easy to use. And so here's a little snapshot of one of the visualization functions of that tool. This is, what is this? Annual average maximum temperature. So that's just one of many, many data indicators that they provide. There's also the California Climate Tracker, and so that's on the right. Various tables that can show you long-term statistics and trends associated with a variety of different indicators, again, temperature, precipitation, and it's done by different regions, so you can actually choose the kind of region you want to look at. So they have climate regions, hydrology regions, or hydrological regions, but California specifically. is the California Heat Assessment Tool, and that one is up here and specific to talking about heat health events. So they've done the analysis to associate the climate conditions for extreme heat with actual health-related impacts, which is super helpful because not having to do that work yourself is great. And so here you can learn about annual number of health events by, I think they go down to census tract. CalEnviro screen, another awesome one. Lots of good maps, charts, data tools. Here we're looking at, what are we looking at here? Oh, just this is actually a general list of the CalEnviro screen results, where they kind of score each census tract based on their Enviro screen criteria. But you can look at anything from ozone, PM 2.5, traffic, drinking water, groundwater levels. So pretty comprehensive. California Healthy Places Index by census tract. Again, you can look at a huge range of climate change indicators, including exposures, social vulnerability. Just for a data nerd like me, these are real jackpots. The California Department of Public Health also has climate change and health vulnerability indicators for California, mostly in tabular form, organized by environmental exposure, population sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. So it gives you an idea of just the different kinds of data that you might be looking for as you do a vulnerability assessment. There's a 3-year annual mean concentration of particulate matter. There's percent of population living in a 100-year flood zone. So an example of adaptive capacity might be percent of households without air conditioning, or percent of an area not covered by tree canopy. And so we'll talk more in the larger webinar series too about how we factor all these things into an actual vulnerability assessment. I think just 2 more. Cal OES has a My Hazards page where you can get some information about your risk, your location's risk level to flood, fire, and other hazards. And there's also the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, BIOS, and ACE websites. Those are just 2 different data sets that provide a huge amount of information on natural resource indicators, so natural environment impacts, species biodiversity, and the climate resilience of those species. So anyways, I'm sorry for folks not in California. I don't know if there are necessarily parallel or applicable things in your states, but these are the ones I'm aware of for California. But I imagine, Washington has its own Fish and Wildlife. That would be another good place to go and look for information. And then finally, some of the key reports that I use when I go and write a vulnerability assessment in California. So there's a California Climate Change Assessment. The county, or the California Department of Public Health, has its own county climate health profile. So it's actually done the analysis for each county on the health impacts of climate change. So those are a couple key reports. All right, so actually this is good. So those are just some resources that I'm familiar with. We'll have an opportunity during this portion of facilitated discussion for you to tell us more about what's been useful for you if you're that far along, but let's just kind of start from the top and see if any of these questions are, lead us to some good dialogue here. And so, we're really looking to share regional knowledge, experiences, ideas, and needs. So the first question here is, what has your organization, that should be done to prepare for the health or other impacts of climate change? And some of you have already touched upon that a little bit, but you might tell us, oh, we've done a vulnerability assessment, but we haven't done an adaptation plan, or we have somebody staffed in that position and they just got a grant for something or other, or I've done an adaptation plan and we did or did not incorporate health, or maybe you're already on to some implementation of some health adaptation strategies. So I'll just be quiet here for a minute and let you all talk. And actually, Paula, Shasta, you might want to chime in on Paula's work here too.
Okay, just to sort of grease the wheels here. What have we done? I mean, we've done a lot, obviously, since we're helping to facilitate these webinars and the National Tribal Climate Health Project, we're using what we've learned to try to help other tribes. So we have a vulnerability assessment, we have an adaptation plan, and now, of course, we're trying to assist tribes throughout the United States. For us, the biggest health impacts that we're concerned about are drought related primarily and wildfire related, since those are the things that have the biggest impact in Southern California. So things like asthma rates increasing because of increased drought and more dust and particulates in the air, that kind of thing. As for resources being useful, I mean, there's so many things that are out there. Of course, having the ability to hire a consultant definitely helps. But if you are unable to get grant funding for that, or if your tribe can't afford to hire a consultant, one of my best resources is other tribes' adaptation plans and vulnerability assessments. I see no reason to be reinventing the wheel each time. It's so great to be able to see what other people have done, take what applies to you, and use it for your own planning and for your own assessments and plans. Big challenge for us is getting buy-in from the tribal community. It's been really hard to get people to opt in to some of our training sessions, our scoping sessions, to see what people's concerns are, how they might want to help. And of course, this is going to be different from tribe to tribe. I have my hypotheses about why it's been hard for us that are very specific to Paula. And hopefully that's not going to be as challenging for others, but it's been a big challenge for us. Some adaptation strategies that are working, and we're getting there as far as our strategies are concerned, trying to get people to start changing their own behavior. And so some of our education and outreach stuff is really working to get people to sort of look at what they've been doing and saying, hey, I can actually make a difference. So our community outreach work has been working. And then partnering with other tribes and agencies, I'm just going to use what we're doing now, as the example.
And actually, Shasta, too, you have a whole Southern California consortium of tribes working together.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm the lead of the Southern California Tribal Working Group with a whole bunch of tribes. We partner with the Climate Science Alliance, which is an organization out of Scripps Institute at University of California, San Diego. So that is a big deal. And I'm also on ITEP's Tribal Climate Change Advisory Group, which, Chaz, aren't you on that too? Chaz, you are on ITEP's thing? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, okay. So yeah,
sorry.
That's okay. I figured George must have hit the mute button. Yeah, there's a ton of groups out there. To be honest with you guys, I feel stretched a little thin sometimes, so it might be better to just focus on your local groups rather than deciding that you've got to sit on every single regional and statewide and national board that there is, which I have a tendency to do. So. And by the way, too, I for 14 years, I taught anthropology at one of our local universities. So I have this really great ability when people don't want to volunteer, being like, so, Hope, why don't you tell us? Calling people out.
Oh, but I was waiting for the screaming goat.
Yeah, screaming goat.
But
Screaming goat. Here. Wait.
Thank you.
Come on, scream. Okay.
One of the reasons why I don't get to be outside like Erin, even though it's a beautiful sunny day, is we do have this one goat that makes the weirdest sounds, and she's all about, like, you know, if she thinks you're outside, she wants attention, and it's weird. But as far as what we've done to prepare, we're slowly starting to get a vulnerability assessment. And it's hard because when I wrote the first series of grants to, you know, get someone to help me, you know, I was really in this like natural resource tunnel. And, you know, luckily I was able to pick up a social scientist who was just, you know, saying like, hey, what about, you know, the kinder, gentler aspects of humanity with health and everything. And as far as the impacts, you know, it's everything. I mean, it can be really overwhelming because, you know, we're all going to respond differently to this. Some of us just naturally are more resilient. Some of us are, you know, against change. And, you know, it's really just trying to, you know, kind of love and nurture everyone in our population to make sure that they're okay. You know, so I guess with that, you know, some of our biggest health concerns are just like the mental health side of it. You know, we had a series of huge floods in 2007 and 2009, and that really kind of changed mentality. I mean, there were a lot of people that became depressed and had some, you know, major behavioral problems because they had to move out of their houses and, you know, just kind of lost hope. You know, useful resources, there's so many of them. You know, it's really overwhelming. And just, you know, I, for one, you know, because I'm just naturally a researcher, I will go down those rabbit holes and come out like 3 days later, you know, on a totally different trajectory. But Kathy Lynn's U of O Northwest Tribal Climate website has been a huge help just to get kind of pointed back in the right direction. And I agree with Shasta that more and more looking at what other tribes are doing in this area has been incredibly helpful. Just because, you know, that wheel's already invented. We can't make it better. And biggest challenges, especially right now where we were starting to do community outreach right before everything got shut down with COVID-19 and trying to go to, you know, online panels like this or, you know, Facebook groups and just getting people to trust that sort of technology because we can't do this in person right now. You know, really kind of crossing our fingers that at some point they'll let us play with others and we can go back to person-to-person outreach. As far as adaptation strategies, the Chehalis tribe has gone through a lot, like every tribe has, and you know they have survived so many things. You know, I think climate change, once we're adapted to this, it's going to seem like no big thing. That's, you know, that's not a specific strategy, but you know, I feel really optimistic that we're going to be able to get over this hurdle. And we have not partnered with anyone yet. Just you know, this program's still very much in its infancy. But, you know, it's really exciting to see how much is out there when it's not really overwhelming. So there's that.
So your vulnerability assessment process, that's just your tribe alone, so you're not collaborating with other tribes on it. And are you incorporating health into that as a focus area?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
We have reached out like informally to other tribes, and there's actually some folks from one of the tribes that have been doing a lot of outreach that is hoping would join this call today. But, you know, it's great to see that there's, you know, so many great opportunities that other people have grabbed, and that, you know, because we're a little later to the game, we can just, you know, parrot what they're doing and just, you know, further strengthen their argument of what works.
Yep. Yeah, and in our work with Paula, actually, so we actually did a Paula-specific vulnerability assessment, an adaptation plan, and came up with a bunch of strategies for them, including health, but other stuff too. What's been helpful is that since Shasta's, you know, well connected in her region, as we need partners to implement things, sometimes the implementation side might be the best place to collaborate because you might have similar interests, and oftentimes the grants, the criteria is built so that they like consortiums. You know, they benefit you, they award you more points if you have partners where more tribes are benefiting from funds. And so we have found that to be a good place to do, you know, a good time to do collaboration. So we've got transportation resilience funds that have come with a consortium, and we're going after other resources together. Cool. Thank you so much, Hope. Does anybody want to volunteer to kind of go through next? Or actually, before we move on, does anybody have questions for Hope?
No, but Hope, I was gonna suggest that you consider, especially since you're new to or you're just beginning the process, that you consider applying to ATNI's Tribal Climate Camp, which is scheduled to occur in September. Likewise, Aaron and Michaela, you can always apply. We accept people from beginning stages to senior level or very experienced, but I think it's really beneficial to people who are just getting started. And it's in Alaska this year.
Even better. For me, I think you presented in Portland and had that really cool video. And that was something that was like, oh my gosh, this is, totally up my alley of like outside, totally nerding out. And it's just, but we're still trying to get buy-in from tribal leadership, that this isn't just, another one of my crazy ideas of something to go for. And, it's like, and I would love to try and get some of our leaders to do that, of course, Alaska, if I could just, tie it in with a charter fishing trip so we can get some monster halibut, then awesome.
It's all free. It's free except for the travel costs to get to Anchorage.
I want to go to
fully
Anchorage.
worth it.
Could you repeat what it's called again, please?
Sorry, what?
Could you repeat what it's called again, please?
Tribal Climate Camp.
Okay.
And it's hosted by ATNI. So if you Google ATNI Tribal Climate Camp, you should go straight to our website.
Great, thank you.
All right. Does anybody want to volunteer to go next and share some of your own experiences? I don't know if we lost Aaron.
Yeah, Michaela, I put the climate camp website link on the chat because I totally have that bookmarked. Like I said, Chaz, that video that you shared that was produced, one of the last ones, is just, I don't know, it really hit home for me. So
yeah, it seems to for a lot of tribal communities, and it's the bottom video that's on that website.
I think we've got Aaron still showing up. Do you want to let us know what your experience has been?
Yeah, apologies for my internet connection. It kind of fluctuates throughout the day. So I guess in terms of preparing for health impacts of climate change, it's, I guess with our community health department and our clinic, it's been hard to kind of get onto their schedule. As well with the pandemic right now, it's not worth their time in a sense, and rightfully so. So hopefully by the time towards the end of summer, hopefully, or by fall, we can begin discussions with them again, because we almost had things going with them to try and do a vulnerability assessment, or at least begin the talks about doing it. And so it's kind of, that's what we're going to have to kind of wait on. But in the meantime, we're doing a wildfire risk assessment for on-reservation, as well as what the impacts could be to some resources in the treaty rights region, specifically along the Snohomish River, right? And so we're just trying to find ways to do studies that could complement a health vulnerability assessment as we can. So
that's great.
But
do you want to go through these other questions too?
I guess in terms of where we really want to look more toward is the welfare and the cultural impacts that climate change has. I mentioned that we're doing a vegetation study through the UW-SIG Climate Impacts Group, and with that, we're going to take that information and kind of go to the elders and do some outreach on our own to try and talk about, with them, what resources are they worried about for future generations to have access to. I have some in my head of what they probably want protected and kind of made more resilient as best as we can manage. That's something that we're more in the outreach component for a lot of our climate change planning. And I guess resources that we found useful. So Phil North, our climate adaptation coordinator, he's been working with the Puget Sound Climate Preparedness Collaborative. I put the link in the chat. So he serves as the co-chair on that collaborative for another year. And it's been kind of a good resource for us to learn about what our neighboring counties and cities are kind of doing around climate change and how we can kind of either give them, what we're working on or what we're focused on in our broad region of treaty rights and how it kind of overlaps some of those counties and cities. And so that's been just a lot of FaceTime and meetings has been kind of useful to communicate those impacts that we're concerned about. And so the biggest challenge I have to echo is getting kind of community buy-in on, the importance of starting to transition maybe to electric cars or getting more microgrids, into LALUP. And it's been kind of, I don't know, lack of, I guess, information available that's accessible to kind of communicate the impacts of climate change. And so we're trying to revamp the website to be more accessible about climate change impacts. Sorry, my screen is distracting me because it keeps saying I'm losing connection. I'm regaining connection. So, yeah, but that's kind of where we're at, I guess, in a nutshell. And if my video cuts out, I'm still audio connection on the phone. So
Cool. That's helpful. Thank you so much. Did anybody have questions for Aaron?
I have a question. What is the size and population at Tulalip?
So the population is just over 5,000 members. We have a 22,000 acre reservation, and we have a treaty rights area that's pretty expansive. I'm not allowed to try and confine it, but it's a wide range under some of the court findings that we have in Washington, like the Bolt decision. So we have a lot of area of concern and a lot of area that we can kind of co-manage or manage directly. And so we have a lot of meetings with the Forest Service, not specifically about climate change usually, but we get that topic in with them as well.
And I ask partly because, obviously the size and scope of your population, your community, your land base is important, but I'm glad you brought up the treaties. There are no treaty tribes in California, or I should say the treaties that we had were never ratified. And so, and then Hope, you mentioned that you're not also a treaty tribe, and there's a lot of tribes throughout the United States that are treaty tribes, and that adds a whole new, or not new, but additional element to your planning. So that, I think that's a really important thing to bring up. And even one of the vulnerabilities that you could consider is the legal vulnerabilities, because treaties are being challenged all the time.
And I'll just add that if you ever have a meeting, if you ever need a meeting space in the Northwest, the Tulalip have the most amazing casino/meeting space that exists. It's spectacular.
We were going to host the Northwest Climate Change Conference, but we had to cancel it due to the pandemic. But we were looking forward to hosting that. But when there's no pandemic, please feel free to stop by Tulalip and contact me and Phil North.
And then I was just going to add that, and before we get to Michaela, that, in getting buy-in from the community and talking about climate change, I feel that when we talk about flooding and we talk about health impacts, we talk about wildfire risk, that when you talk about those things, that there seems to be no disagreement. And so I often don't even use the words climate change when I'm talking to tribal leaders. I talk about the specific impacts that they're experiencing and that they already know that they're experiencing. Also the vulnerabilities that make them vulnerable to all impacts related, whether it's climate related or not. Not having a strong economic base just makes you vulnerable to any impact, whether it be a virus or whether it be a climate impact. Having a weak transportation system or no risk management plan in place, that makes us all vulnerable to any impact. And so I hardly ever talk about climate change when I go talk to tribal leaders. I always try to talk about the specific impacts, and I almost, actually, I pretty much never get blowback on that. And then I also really emphasize the fact that there's a lot of opportunity to assert tribal sovereignty when thinking about climate impacts or increasing resilience to climate impacts. You can become energy sovereign, you can save yourselves money. There's ways to push tribal sovereignty in ways that I think really inspires tribal leaders to be like, oh yeah, but if we can access funding through climate change grants, why not do that, especially when we are improving our tribal sovereignty or asserting our tribal sovereignty rights. So just some thoughts there that I wanted to share.
Yeah, those are excellent points, the sovereignty thing. And then if you are having people say, well, climate change, oh, we're not worried about climate change. I find that if you come at it from the financial perspective, you also get a lot of buy-in, whether it's we can apply for grants or, these are the effects this may have on the bottom line of, our fishery, our agriculture production, or, in the case of Paula, the big driver is the casino. So just talking about that. Yeah.
And one of the things that soapbox I always get on when I talk to tribes are that, anything that would improve your resilience to any impact whatsoever, that is all, any of those efforts increase your resilience to climate impacts. And so therefore, all of those efforts are also eligible for funding through the Tribal Resilience Program and the BIA's Tribal Resilience Funding Program. So anything that would improve anything that's a cultural or a tribal priority, we can tackle through an application to the Tribal Resilience Program at BIA. So I try not to limit tribes to thinking natural resources. It's much bigger. The opportunity is much bigger than that.
Okay.
Although the BIA being more restricted to, mostly restricted to training or planning, with some implementation
I disagree.
funds as well.
Planning, yes. But it could be, you can do demonstration type research projects in that planning. That when I work with tribes, I specifically talk to an individual or a group and really try to, how are we going to frame the study that you want to do or the research or the planning that you want to do? How do we frame that in a way that's going to get funded?
Yep.
90% of what to do with tribes.
Yep.
But
we might have lost Aaron, but he did a good job giving us some information.
Still on audio, but
okay, great. Michaela, do you want to share some of your experiences as well?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll start with the campfire. I actually wasn't working for the tribe when the campfire hit. I was still graduating college at CSU Chico. But I know that my predecessor was planning for a emergency communications sort of like notification project, which would like email or text the tribal members whenever there was some kind of like emergency after the campfire, but that was never completed. So far as preparing for climate change, that was the project that I knew about and would like to continue. I think that it's really important, especially like we talked about the way that like the tribal members are dispersed, communications can be a weakness. So yeah, and I would love to talk more to my boss about getting a vulnerability assessment done.
Are you familiar with the BIA Tribal Resilience Grant opportunity?
And I've never, no.
Okay. They just went through a
hand.
solicitation, so they'll probably, they're closed for the 2020 cycle, but I believe they've moved to 2-year cycles, and maybe Chaz, you know more. I don't know if they'll still offer it every year, but it'll be a 2-year funding cycle.
Yeah, they'll offer it. They're expecting to offer it each year for a 2-year funding cycle, so you could have the project for 2 years. But in all cases, they will give you an extension without any question at all if you ask for it. And I will mention that if you apply for there's a $60,000 tribal capacity building grant that often tribes apply for first.
Yeah.
If you apply for the $60,000 capacity building grant, it's almost guaranteed that you will get it. And that's really intended to allow you to hire someone or to allow yourself the freedom and the freedom to actually develop the time and materials to apply for the grant in the future. And the second, you would then be eligible for a $150,000 grant the next year.
Wow.
And then similarly, the travel awards for $15,000. If you apply for that, you will also almost guaranteed to get it. So.
And Michaela, too, you have the benefit of being in California, where there's a new tribal government challenge that just got released. It's another funding opportunity that could be applicable for you. It's coming out of the Strategic Growth Council.
And I just added their web link to the Tribal Resilience Program to the chat box for you.
Great, thank you so much.
So,
oh, sorry about that. Michaela, I just wanted to say, if you can find out who your local BIA rep is for that grant, at least for us, it was really great to reach out to our local person that administers the grant, because he's been like this idea factory of, future projects that, embrace resiliency. And because he has a fisheries background, he was really trying to hustle me for freshwater mussels, through resiliency, just because they do so much for water quality. But he's been a huge help, and was one of the people that really, helped me realize that it would be best if I hired someone that had the opposite academic background for me to really open up, into the world of what climate change really is. So if you can figure out who that person is, definitely give them a call.
Yeah, I'll look into that.
And us as tribal resilience liaisons, we're actually funded by the Tribal Resilience Program. That's how we're hired. And so yeah, Hope, if you reach out to me, I'll help you out as well. And Michaela, you can reach out to Althea Walker in the Southwest Cask, and she would be an equally great resource.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, Althea is great.
So Michaela, would you say your biggest challenges are just trying to figure out how to do this in a non-contiguous boundary and resources?
Yeah, and just getting this started, honestly. I've been working with the tribe for about 8 months, and we've definitely been focusing on other things, and the casino construction, and trying to make sure that the resources on the tribal property remain safe from that construction. So we've, I mean, I feel
like everybody's mentioned getting sufficient buy-in to get their work going. And since Shasta, you've kind of made it really far. What did you do to get buy-in?
Well, so I don't necessarily recommend doing things the way I do them. A lot of this depends on the way your tribal leadership is set up. In my case, I just did it. So we have a pretty loose structure for my office here. And if I basically go to the tribal leadership and say, there's a grant opportunity here and I'm going to apply for it, they're like, okay. So I don't have the greatest advice. I have colleagues who also have much more strict processes for their leadership, where they have to get on a council agenda and they have to make a presentation and they have to do a proposal and get everybody to sign off with a tribal resolution, and that is not the case for me. If you know that that's the case for your particular leadership structure, and you're nodding, so I guess it is.
Yeah, that's it.
Then it's a good idea to talk to them about these things, far in advance. And, like Chaz was saying, don't necessarily make it about climate change, but make it about how can we increase our resilience as a tribe. And these are the sorts of things I think might be helpful if opportunities come up for this. Would I have your support in going after those? Because sometimes you don't have a whole lot of time. You find out about an opportunity and it's a 30-day application due date. And so you don't have 3 or 4 weeks just to get on the council agenda. So if you know that there's things you want to do, go and talk to them from the get-go, and that way you know that they're interested in pursuing these things.
That's a great idea. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'd love to hear from others how they've done that with their tribes. Like I said, mine is unusual that I just kind of do what I want, and they're like, "What's she doing?" Oh, okay, it's fine.
But you're pretty high ranked and well trusted, and you've been there a long time.
Well, yeah, after 15 years, they kind of know that I'm not going to do anything too crazy. So.
Anybody else want to share on the topic of buy-in? I have one more kind of group question for you. I feel like the topic of emergency management is it's in this sphere. It begs to be talked about. I'm wondering what you all are learning about your emergency preparedness infrastructure as you go through this pandemic. I know that this is certainly an area where Paula wants to do more and is maybe seeing some of the things that would have been nice to have had in place already. What about you guys? Are you seeing is emergency preparedness, seeming strong in your community right now? Is it something that you are now saying, okay, well, as climate change hits, we really need to have some more stuff in place?
Go for it, Aaron. I see you nodding.
For Tulalip, we just updated our hazard mitigation plan, and this is the first time they considered climate change impacts into it, and so it's been a good first step to get in onto the emergency management sides of the tribal government. And so I think what's currently happening is helping them see how their new plan is working, and I'm sure it'll be updated accordingly, depending on the specific details that they're dealing with through the clinic and within the community. And so I'm kind of, in terms of preparing for infrastructure damages or foreseeable projections of that with climate change, it's a good opportunity to kind of push that toward the end of summer, I think, in terms of the timeline, because it's definitely on everybody's minds here, especially middle management, which is where we've been trying to get the buy-in.
Do you guys have an emergency operations plan or emergency management plan in place, or just the hazard mitigation?
We have an emergency plan too, and it's pretty tied into the hazard mitigation. And so it's the same individual working on both, and she's been in our climate change outreach efforts, and so it'll be a good, good opportunity there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, just to make sure that those linkages are happening. How about helping Michaela on emergency management?
I just wanted to say that, for us, it was kind of a good eye opener that our emergency management plan needs to be like a living document, and, it needs to show adaptation and resiliency as well. most of our emergency stuff is so flood or fire focused that, you know, this wasn't really considered when it was created. And, you know, the emergency plan has not changed at all since it was originally created. And I know for some of it, you know, it was really just copied and pasted without like a lot of editing. So this is going to be a great opportunity for us to be able to expand it and, you know, make some changes so that it is dynamic. You know, it doesn't have to be all gloom and doom. You know, this could be, you know, our framework to, you know, bigger and better things as we all survive it. So.
I think that's, she brings up an important point too, that you know, these should be documents that are updated every time you have a disaster that you have to respond to. You should be taking lessons learned and using those to update your plan. That's climate related, but it's everything related, because as far as I'm concerned, nothing is not related to climate at this point. Even something like this current pandemic, you know, as time goes by and we get through it, people start to do some of the research and look at the data, we might find that there were areas that were more dramatically impacted because they've had changes in their overall climate. Maybe their asthma rates have increased. Although actually, as an aside, some new research that I just read about today shows that having asthma does not seem to increase your susceptibility to having a severe outcome with COVID-19, which is good to know. But the lessons learned can apply to pretty much anything. And I can tell you, we're in the midst of updating our hazard mitigation plan, and we are now including a chapter on pandemic response.
And I just also wanted to point out that Chaz added in the chat that the ITEP has like a facilitated group like this that helps tribes with their emergency management plans. And I know before the pandemic, there wasn't a lot of interest to do this. And now that the pandemic has gone through, you know, a lot of my colleagues are finally like taking the bait that this is something we should sign up for. So thanks for posting that, chat.
Yeah, I think ITEP is going to get multiple people who are interested in working on that. And you know, for me, my big hope is that when we're done with our hazard mitigation plan and we're also developing, making changes in our emergency response plan, that it's not just going to be another one of those binders that sits on the shelf and gets a single sentence in my grant report, you know, deliverable plan. Here's the PDF. Okay, now I can forget about it. We can't forget about any of this stuff right now. And Michaela, I'm curious to hear what you mentioned the experience with the campfire, which I have to imagine was just devastating and so hard. So what was Machupta's response? Were you working for the tribe when it happened?
No, I was still in school.
Oh, okay.
But I was in the area, so like I said, my predecessor was working on a communications project to be able to text all of the tribe members when emergency things happen, and it was like that project didn't continue after he left. I would like to continue that, but as far as like an emergency management plan, no, it hasn't been updated since I've been working there, so it would. Yeah, joining this would be really good.
Well, and considering again that every single tribe is going to be different, and so you know, you're saying that a lot of the tribal members, they're in their tribally owned housing, but they're not all in one place. Mm-hmm. You know, not every single one of these things is going to apply to every single tribe. It might make more sense to work with the city of Chico to say, you know, how are we going to integrate these tribally owned residences into the citywide plan, rather than try to develop an emergency plan for these, you know, scattered different areas. Just like, to be honest, I'm not including sea level rise in my planning, because even though California is going to be impacted by sea level rise, we're 40 miles inland. You know, if the sea level rises so much that it makes it to Paula, I'm pretty sure that humans are going to have moved on to the next world. So So you got to pick what's relevant for you. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive, every single thing needs to be considered.
Okay.
All right, well, we have been doing a good job chatting away here. I want to try to cover just a couple last things before we close out, if that's all right. Thank you so much for a really good dialogue. It's been helpful to learn from you all. If you come across anything else that you think of that this group could benefit from in terms of a link that you want to send, an announcement, a resource that others should know about, drop it in the chat box. I think what I'll do is I'll add it to the end of this presentation, any additional resources that we came up with together before I send it out to the larger group.
And don't forget that you're all together on that group's IO list, so you can talk to one another through that list as well.
That's right. So we won't go into a lot of detail on the Tribal Climate Health Project tools, but I just want to help you navigate around the site if you haven't gone to it yet. So, the background is Tribal Climate Health Project is the project that was developed under PALA, originally with EPA funds and now primarily through BIA funds. It's been going on for several years, and that's how we're developing. That's the project that leads the trainings that we run along with a lot of other programming. And so let me actually just go to the website itself and kind of show you live how to navigate around. So it's tribalclimatehealth.org. Most of the key features are under this Learn header, but just to also point out that you can go to our news and events, where we have articles and blogs, and if there's new events coming up, you can go here to peek at it. You can also subscribe. So under Connect, you can connect to us in all of these different ways on social media. You can also contact us directly through email here, and then you can subscribe to our email list if you'd like. Please join our email list. And then, like I said, most of the resources are under Learn. So I want to show you a couple things. One is the Resource Clearinghouse. It's one of the key features we first developed as part of the Tribal Climate Health Project. And so really it's hundreds of resources. We try to keep it well updated, but it's all in the realm of things that are applicable for tribes on climate change and health. It's filterable by various filters, so topics, materials. Oh, that was my kid. Josh? I hope you got it.
Hey, it wouldn't be a COVID lockdown webinar if there wasn't both a dog and a kid.
Oh man, yeah, he fell. Okay, so you can sort by resource type, area served, publishers, years. So lots of different ways to filter information. So especially topics. So if you have a particular interest in some topic, you can filter by that. Maybe for this area, you could actually filter by Northwest. So if I just do that really quick, you can see some of the key resources that might be applicable to your area. It might include examples of vulnerability assessments or adaptation plans. Here's that tribal climate tool, some of the stuff from the University of Washington, videos and resources from other tribes in your area. So I welcome you to look around here as a place to go to look for relevant information on this topic. There's also a resources map so that you could actually look by map. You can drill down here and see if there's anything in your area that's perhaps applicable for you, interesting for you. So that's by location. And then finally, not finally, but we'll go here. This is just a little introduction. And then we have a series of training materials. And so here's a lot of slides and full training materials from slides from presentations and full trainings that we have conducted. And so if you're ever interested in more information from what trainings we've already done, you can look there. But I mainly wanted to point you to some of these tools. first one here is the adaptation planning tool, and it's something we call Exposures, Impacts, and Strategies Inventory tool, so the EASY tool. We'll go into this a little bit more on our webinars. In the next 3 webinars, we'll probably be talking about this. And really, it's a customizable companion tool. So basically, if you're doing a vulnerability assessment or adaptation plan, the idea is this can help accelerate the process of doing that work, which can be incredibly cumbersome, particularly if you're doing a vulnerability assessment and trying to figure out, what am I looking for? What are my possible exposures? What are my possible impacts? How do I measure those? So what indicators would be helpful? And then if I can measure it, how do I find the data to do so? So it points you to the best data sources that we have knowledge of with links so that you can go and pull the data yourself. It also serves as a worksheet, so you can drop that information, historical baseline and projected information for your tribe specifically into this spreadsheet. And then as you move your way, so that's for both exposures and impacts, and as you move your way into adaptation planning, there's a whole adaptation tab as well that has a filterable menu of over 130 possible adaptation strategies that we've mined from tribes and other best practices in different organizations, just as a way to wet your whistle, because starting from scratch is tough. If you're just brainstorming, okay, now what actions can we possibly take? That could take you a long time just to figure out what's possible. At least you start off with some 130 ideas. From there, you can build off and include others. And it also functions as a worksheet, a planning worksheet, so that you can prioritize. You can filter, prioritize, and then try to associate certain tasks that you want to proceed with time frames and responsible departments and a few other planning details. And so the idea is to kind of take the burden off of you to have to start from scratch on a lot of these things and go wildly searching around for data sources and ideas. And so, yeah, I think probably don't have a whole lot of time to even go into this. I'll just kind of show you what it looks like. It's in Excel. If you're not an Excel person, this may frighten you. It's somewhat comprehensive, but for example, you can go through each of the exposures we talk about in this training: the drought, wildfire, sea level rise and melting ice, temperature extremes, and wildfire. And then also filter by the secondary exposures. And then you can see a lot of different ways to look and measure those possible exposures with national data sources right here. And then because we have had work that was done in particular in California, we have some California specific data sources. And then here's where you would drop historical baseline and projected data, and it gives you a chance to actually provide an exposure risk level for each of these exposures. And then you can drill down more deeply into impacts. And if you want to specifically look at just health-related impacts, you could filter for that. And then you can look specifically at impact indicators and where those data sources might be. And so while we didn't go into a huge list of health impacts on this call, the huge list is here. And so if you wanted to look through, you could even filter by, right here, you can filter by Northwest, and it will sort of filter down for those things that are associated with exposures that are likely in the Northwest. And then you could look at possible exposures. And if you want to look specifically at health, you can. It will, even just looking at this could give you a lot of information that could be useful for your vulnerability assessment, because this is all driven and derived by the literature and research that's out there on climate change and health. And so, yeah, think of it as a menu of ideas, and then your job is to go in and determine the likelihood and severity and applicability for your specific tribe. And then your job is also to prioritize amongst all of these vulnerabilities, which ones are the most key for you as they are associated with your own values and assets that you want to protect. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that together on the webinar series, but I wanted to make sure you knew where it was. If you find yourself wanting to use this and want some additional assistance, you can just reach out to me and I can help demystify it a little bit further. One more thing I want to show you here is a survey template. So as you're going out and doing outreach, usually the beginning of your vulnerability assessment process, you'll go out and try to summon some information that gives you an idea of where your community is at with climate change, what they think is important, what they value, what their observations and experiences have been. And so this is one example that you could use. You could just take it, copy it, customize it for yourself because it's all in Google Forms, and make it your own and change the questions and however you'd like. But this is what we've done with several tribes to try to get some information broadly from community members. And so it's perspectives, it's what they're more, what climate exposures and impacts they're most concerned about. It's getting their impressions about their value, what community assets are most valued. So anything from health to cultural sites to sovereignty to wildlife. And then gives them an opportunity to do a little bit of storytelling. So, we want to know, particularly from elders, really about things that have changed, what stories they may have and observations. I find this very valuable for filling in lots of gaps in my vulnerability assessments as I do them, including grabbing quotes from members of your community, because quotes can really personalize a vulnerability assessment and make it a little bit more reader friendly when we are hearing people's actual experiences. So I wanted to point out, those couple of things. The Tribal Climate Health Project has other things you can look at. You can look at sample reports. You can actually download Word documents of Paula's vulnerability assessment and its climate adaptation plan. And in Word, you feel free to actually use the format, use whatever the content is applicable to you, so you don't have to start from scratch there either. On that page too, there was a resolution template as well that came from ITEP. So those are just some ways that it's possible for us to shave some time off of the process of conducting this kind of work. Let's see, I am, just about done here. Let me get back to my page. I think the last thing I want to do here is just, we have maybe, what do we have, a couple of minutes? Is there any last comments or questions for the group?
I'll just observe that we actually had the trifecta because we did have a boyfriend in the background who popped into the frame briefly. Or maybe that was a brother, I don't know, but at least he had clothes on, so let's.
Yeah, that's my partner that I live with, so I should have warned him not to come into the living room area before, but I didn't want to wake him up. It's his day off. Sorry about that.
It's like, it's better than a Sasquatch sighting. It's wonderful to have that, like, whoa, hey. And I'm thank you all for the call. I really appreciate it.
And I actually have to jump off for another meeting real quick, but thank you. I really did enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, you really contributed, so thanks for being here. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Is there any last comments?
I just want to thank you for the phone call, and I finally got to see who Chaz is. So it's nice to meet you virtually, Chaz and Hope and Michaela. And I look forward to the remaining of the webinar series. So thank you.
All right, we'll see you on the webinar series, and we'll follow up with these resources over email, and let's keep the conversation going on the listserv.
All right, thanks, everybody. Stay well.
Thank you so much, everyone.
You're welcome.
So much for so many good resources.
So glad to help.
All right, take care.